Welcome to Cold Case Story. Today we are going to start this story by stepping into the chilling, unsettling truth behind two of history's most haunting unsolved cases. We are looking at mysteries that don't just defy a simple explanation. They completely defy logic. They defy any sense of closure. These are stories of profound, definite absence. In this explainer, we are going to walk step by step through the timelines, we are going to examine the baffling evidence left behind, and we'll try to understand how massive, tangible things and the actual living, breathing people attached to them can simply cease to be, just vanish. Our tone today is going to be dark, it's going to be mysterious, and above all else, it will be deeply respectful to the victims of these historical tragedies. Because behind every ghost story, there are real people who never made it home.
So, how do things simply vanish? We aren't just talking about a dropped coin on the street or a misplaced letter in the mail. We are looking at a massive, completely seaworthy ship found utterly abandoned in the middle of the unforgiving, freezing Atlantic Ocean, not a single soul on board. And, on the completely opposite side of the spectrum, we're looking at a staggering, priceless room, literally an entire architectural marvel made of fossilized tree resin and gold that was completely swallowed up by the horrific chaos of the Second World War. I mean, how does that actually happen? How does an entire ship's crew of experienced sailors and their family members just evaporate into thin air, leaving their belongings perfectly intact? How does an acknowledged eighth wonder of the world just disappear off the face of the earth? These are the exact questions that have frustrated, haunted, and literally driven investigators, treasure hunters, and historians completely mad for generations.
All right, let's open up this investigation docket. Here is our agenda for today's deep dive. First, we'll look at the cold case hook. Second, the background and incidents. Third, the clues and investigations. Fourth, the twists and leading theories. And fifth, we'll get into the final conclusions.
Section 1. The Cold Case Hook. Echoes of the Missing. We are going to begin with the incredibly grim reality of two very different but equally chilling historical crime scenes. These two distinct mysteries perfectly frame our central question for today. On one hand, you have an empty ship sailing the 1872 Atlantic. Human life vanished from the Mary Celeste, leaving behind an entirely intact, untouched physical shell. It's incredibly eerie. And on the other hand, we have an exquisite Russian palace room stripped completely bare in 1941. A priceless physical shell, the Amber Room, was systematically stolen, dismantled, and erased amidst the massive, devastating human loss of World War II. So we have one case where the people vanished and left the structure behind, and another where the structure vanished while millions of people perished around it. These are two distinct types of vanishings, obviously, but both of them leave this incredibly haunting, echoing silence that we can still hear loud and clear today. It's the absolute silence of the unknown. 10. That is the exact number of souls who vanish without a single trace into the dark, freezing waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And I really want us to pause and remember that this wasn't just some faceless, anonymous crew. This was Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, who was a highly experienced, deeply respected, and incredibly capable mariner. This was his beloved wife, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, and, most heartbreakingly of all, this was their little 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda, just a toddler. Alongside them were 7 seasoned, hardened crewmen: Albert G. Richardson, Andrew Gilling, Edward William Head, Volker Lorenzen, Boy Lorenzen, Arian Martins, and Gottlieb Gottschalk. We are talking about 10 human beings, 10 distinct, full lives, entirely erased from existence. They left absolutely nothing but a ghost ship drifting aimlessly on the ocean currents. What could possibly have driven a seasoned captain to abandon ship with his wife and baby? That's the chilling reality we're dealing with today.
Section 2. Background and incidents. The empty shells. Let's move straight into our background files and see how these literally impossible incidents actually unfolded on the ground and on the water.
Now, the absolute most crucial point you need to understand right here is that the Mary Celeste was not a shipwreck. I repeat, not a shipwreck. On the 4th of December 1872, a British brigantine named the Dei Gratia spotted her sailing erratically. Her sails were a bit torn, but she was moving. When the boarding party actually climbed up onto the wooden deck, they found a scene of completely interrupted life. It was frozen in time. They found 1,700 barrels of highly volatile commercial alcohol sitting perfectly safe down in the hold. They found the captain's logbook open and wet on the desk. They even found provisions and food still perfectly present in the galley. But the ship's massive, heavy lifeboat was missing, and so were all 10 passengers. There were empty davits hanging off the side of the deck where that lifeboat should have been tied. The ropes were there. The boat was completely gone. This perfectly seaworthy, entirely floating vessel had been abandoned in a terrifying, desperate hurry in the dead center of the ocean. Why?
And this perfectly illustrates the incredibly tragic fate of our second cold case today. The Amber Room, located inside the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg, was an absolute architectural masterpiece. It was originally gifted to the Russian Tsar Peter the Great all the way back in 1716. Listen to this. It took decades of painstaking 18th century craftsmanship to perfect. I want you to imagine 55 square meters of wall space, completely covered in 6 tons of luminous, beautifully carved fossilized resin, thick, glowing, honey gold panels of amber, all interspersed with brilliant gold leaf mirrors and priceless jewels. People historically said that standing inside of it felt exactly like standing inside the sun. It was that bright. But flash forward to September 1941. Advancing German forces reached the palace. The Soviet curators were desperate. They literally tried to hide this masterpiece by pasting regular wallpaper over it, but the Germans obviously found it. And then, within a mere 36 hours, a specialized German art unit ruthlessly stripped the walls completely bare. Decades and decades of human creation, violently dismantled, packed into 27 wooden crates, and hauled away in less than 2 days.
Section 3. Clues and Investigations. Tracking the Ghosts. With both of these grim scenes firmly established, it is time to examine the timelines. We really need to do a deep dive into the evidence left behind.
So let's trace the Mary Celeste's final known days step by step. They originally departed New York Harbor on November 7, 1872. By all accounts, everything was completely normal. The weather was fine, the crew was steady. Then we look at the actual ship's logbook that was found on the abandoned vessel. The absolute final entry is dated November 25th, recording a position near the Azores Islands. But remember, the ship wasn't found until December 4th by the crew of the Degradia. Notice that absolutely haunting 9-day gap. 9 whole days. And the Mary Celeste was found more than 400 miles east of her last logged position. That means for over a week, this massive, heavy ship sailed through the treacherous Atlantic Ocean, navigating the rough waters entirely on her own, with absolutely no living human being at the helm. It is a profoundly chilling image to picture. A fully rigged ship cutting silently through the endless gray water, completely, terrifyingly empty.
Similarly, the paper trail for the Amber Room simply drops off a cliff and disappears into the abyss. We know for a fact it was looted in 1941. We know it was transported to Königsberg, which is the city we now call Kaliningrad. We know this because black and white photographs actually exist showing these gorgeous amber panels temporarily reassembled on the plain walls of Königsberg Castle in 1942. It looked reduced, obviously, like a stolen, out-of-place trophy, but it was absolutely there. And then, nothing, just silence. In 1944, as the brutal war decisively turned and the Soviet forces rapidly advanced, the room was frantically packed right back into those exact same 27 wooden crates to be evacuated. Königsberg was absolutely devastated by massive British bombing raids in August of that year. When the thick smoke finally cleared and Soviet forces took the ruined city in April 1945, the paper trail permanently ended. The Amber Room had completely vanished into the thick, impenetrable fog of war.
Section 4. Twists and Leading Theories. Dead Ends and Dark Waters. An investigation is really only as good as its leads, right? And let me tell you, both of these cold cases are absolutely filled to the brim with red herrings, dead ends, and very, very dark twists.
Over a century of intense inquiry into the Mary Celeste has produced several major theories. At first, everyone suspected mutiny, but that was actually quickly ruled out due to a complete lack of any signs of violence, blood, or struggle on board. The most widely accepted and plausible theory involves those 1,700 barrels of highly volatile alcohol in the hold. You see, a sudden, terrifying buildup of toxic fumes could have caused a panic about an invisible, impending detonation. I want you to imagine the pure, unadulterated terror of that moment. Captain Briggs, fearing an explosion is seconds away, frantically orders everyone, his wife, his baby daughter, his crew, into the tiny lifeboat. He secures it to the back of the ship with a long tow line, just waiting safely behind for the deadly fumes to clear out. But then, a sudden squall hits. The ocean swells. The incredibly stressed tow line violently snaps. And suddenly, those 10 people are left stranded in a tiny boat in the freezing, endless ocean, helplessly watching their perfectly seaworthy ship sail away without them, leaving them to slowly die of exposure. And just adding to this incredibly dark history, a later owner of the famously unlucky Mary Celeste deliberately wrecked her onto a reef in 1885 for a cheap insurance fraud scam. She survived the impossible, only to be destroyed by human greed at a final tragic coda.
Now, the obsessive search for the Amber Room is equally fraught with terrifying dead ends. It has honestly been one of the most exhaustive, expensive, and dangerous treasure hunts in all of human history. One leading, heavily researched theory is that the 27 heavy crates were secretly loaded onto the MV Wilhelm Gustloff. In January 1945, this massive German passenger ship was torpedoed by a Soviet submarine in the freezing Baltic Sea. It remains one of the absolute deadliest maritime disasters to ever happen, killing an estimated 9,000 desperate people in the ice-cold water. Divers have searched that icy wreckage time and time again, but no amber has ever been found. Another major theory suggests the crates were buried deep within the extensive, damp, stone-lined tunnel networks beneath Kaliningrad, sealed away in the absolute dark and forgotten. Or, tragically and perhaps most realistically, that the 6 tons of prehistoric amber simply burned to gray ash during those devastating 1944 British bombings. The dark twist here is that the pure obsession to find this room has literally driven men to their graves. Take the infamous case of German researcher George Stein. He dedicated his entire life to obsessively tracking documents related to the Amber Room. In 1987, his lifeless body was discovered in a remote Bavarian forest. He had been brutally stabbed multiple times. The authorities officially and bizarrely ruled it a suicide. Let me tell you, almost no one who actually knows the gruesome details of that case actually believes that.
$1 billion. I really want you to just let that staggering number sink in for a second. $1 billion. If the Amber Room somehow magically survived the Allied bombings, if it didn't burn to useless ash, and if it isn't currently sitting rotting at the bottom of the freezing Baltic Sea, that is the estimated maximum value of the original room today. Up to $1 billion. It is arguably the single greatest lost treasure in the entire world. And you have to remember, amber isn't just gold or diamonds. It is fossilized tree resin that formed 40 to 50 million years ago. Those 18th century craftsmen shaped a material that is literally older than the human species itself. The sheer historical, artistic, and obviously monetary weight of this missing artifact is completely staggering. It's no wonder people have literally killed and died trying to find it.
Section 5. The final conclusions. The silence of history. We have meticulously tracked the timelines. We have desperately chased down the various theories, and we have looked closely at the grim evidence. But where do these incredibly dark, cold cases stand today? This leaves us with a very powerful, very sobering reality directly from our source files. It's a quote that simply reads, "The Atlantic does not keep records." I think this perfectly captures the brutal, unfeeling, and deeply terrifying nature of the Mary Celeste mystery. The ocean received 10 living, breathing, hopeful people into its dark waters, and it closed right over them, without a single word of explanation, without a shred of emotion, and without any possibility of return. The empty ship sailed on for hundreds of miles, almost as if it was a ghost trying desperately to tell someone what had happened to its family. But ships don't speak, and the ocean certainly doesn't confess its sins.
Ultimately, this explainer shows us something really profound. It shows us that these aren't just fun little historical puzzles for us to solve on a rainy day. They are deeply profound, devastating human tragedies that are completely rooted in absence. When we talk about the Mary Celeste, we absolutely have to remember the tiny, empty shoes of a 2-year-old girl sitting right next to her mother's gloves on a quiet, eerily bobbing ship in the middle of nowhere. It's heartbreaking. And when we talk about the Amber Room, we are talking about centuries of accumulated human splendor, completely erased by a brutal, unforgiving era of war that destroyed millions of innocent lives and swallowed up everything it ever touched. The original Amber Room is either hidden away in pitch darkness right now, or it is simply nowhere at all.
So I have to ask you, what do you think happened to the Mary Celeste crew in the priceless Amber Room? These 2 historical cold cases remain wide open to this very day. Did a frayed stress tow line really snap and doom the Briggs family to a slow death at sea? Is the Amber Room decaying at the bottom of the Baltic, or is it locked away right now in a silent, private vault of some secretive billionaire? When the physical evidence fades away and all the witnesses are long in the grave, how do we ever really know where things go and they just vanish? I want you to leave your best theories down in the comments below. We read all of them, and this community always has the best insights. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another deep dive into the unknown. Thank you for joining me on this explainer for Cold Case Story, and I will see you in the next investigation.